Right now, her dad is in absolute grief. I mean, his world's been turned upside down. After waking up, finding his 11-year-old son screaming. Now, when the dad, Bruce Sr., ran frantically to check in on his son, he found his son suffering from multiple stab wounds in his own bed. 11-year-old Bruce Johnson Jr. was stabbed. Now, the first thing you'd think is an intruder is in the house. Emotions like panic, alarm, distress would all set in. Now, this incident took place at an address in Hobbs, New Mexico. And of course, the dad called police. He dialed 911 and called for ambulance and police, and they were dispatched to the scene. The next thing the dad did was he went to check in on his estranged wife, who was in the other bedroom, and found her unconscious with self-inflicted stab wounds to the chest. Now, emergency services arrived at the home just after 1 a.m. and rushed Bruce Jr. and the mom to the hospital. But sadly, Bruce Jr. was pronounced dead just a few hours later at 4:19 a.m. He could not overcome the severity of his multiple injuries. Mary, however, who's the mom, was stabilized, and then she was moved to a different hospital in Lubbock, Texas. Now, this is where it gets sad. Now, when police and ambulance arrived at the scene, Bruce Jr. was actually conscious, he was awake, and he revealed that it was his own mom that stabbed him. Now, the mom, Mary Johnson, was battling mental health issues, and it had been reported that she had hurt her 11-year-old son on at least 2 different occasions. Now, we can class them as altercations or issues, but what happened was, whatever happened was so significant that the dad picked up Bruce Jr. and moved in order to safeguard him. He was also in the process of getting a divorce. Now, this was a man that loved his son dearly and made the necessary steps to make sure that he was okay and safe. He moved from Oklahoma to Hobbs, New Mexico. Now, it had been 40 days since Mary had seen her son, and she was desperate to see him and spend time with him, so she asked her dad could she go and see the son at his house before the divorce was finalised, and the dad relented against his better judgment, but again, this is all in hindsight. And Bruce Jr. relented. Again, as I said, he allowed Mary to stay despite her ranting on social media about not wanting children and fearing that Bruce Jr. was listening to a conversation with God. She says that Bruce Jr. was listening to her thoughts, her writing, her speaking to God, and even heard what she thought when she was asleep. Condolences to the little boy's family. Stay safe.